Our guest speaker this evening is Mr. Bob Layson, a personal friend of mine I've known for many years. Promises to be on his best behaviour. He will talk for as long as seems necessary, and continue for some minutes. He promises to stop before I speak again. Over to you. Thank you. The dull top title for this talk this evening was Managing the Economy? Question mark, possibly. Triple exclamation mark would have been more accurate. The concept, or as Cockney char ladies used to say, the very idea of managing the economy should be repugnant to any libertarian, depending on what one means by an economy and managing. So we'll start with the economy. I have a Mrs. Thatcher moment coming over me. She famously is said to have said, and she did say, if you leave out the context, there is no such thing as society. There are only individuals and their families. Well, I've come to almost the same conclusion with economies. There are no economies. There are only people practicing economy or economising with what they have. Though undoubtedly there are social relations, just as there are economic relations. In fact, I think a society is pretty much an economy. Or rather, there are most social relations, most of the important ones, are economic relations. And the rest are added unto those. And many of those that are unpaid are paid in kind. Friendliness, future favours, being thought well of. There is a market for all kinds of things. It doesn't require the transfer of money. So, if people are asked, because of course we all know that societies exist, there is such a thing as society, if they're asked to name how many there are in the United Kingdom, this obvious question would get different answers, of course. Is there one for each nation? Is there one for each language group? It is not so obvious what these societies are. Generally, it's thought to be a nation state. But that can be rather unfortunate, because the idea is then that things that aren't in it should be in it, and things that aren't quite of it, not the right religion, not the right language, should be out of it. So I don't think we should encourage the idea of an economy, because there's far too much for any decent libertarian. Goes along with the idea of a properly sized and boundaried nation and state and a people. And I'm not sure about peoples either. My God, I don't believe in anything except individuals. So, what to begin with? Well, we have relations. No economy now. We have relations between property owners. We have capitalist acts between consenting adults, as has been said. I don't deny that at some stage in history, the people got to be the people they are, and using the language they do, and with the property holdings that they have, because they might have been a thumping great state, or an invasion or two, or a powerful church, or monarch, or whatever. That is not to be denied. It didn't have to go that way. It shouldn't have gone that way. In one sense, it shouldn't. Morally shouldn't. But it may have undoubtedly done so. But even the veriest Marxist would have to acknowledge that what brings something into being doesn't have to continue, because the idea is that it's a bourgeois economy that brings about the socialist state, almost, or socialist society, inadvertently. It doesn't want to do it, it can't help but do it. And you don't need it afterwards. In fact, you mustn't have it afterwards. So in the same way, it may have taken all sorts of wacko religious ideas and ideas of monarchy and the rest of it to get to a number of people living contentedly with each other, acknowledging each other's property holdings, pretty much agreeing on how to obtain legal redress for malpractice or disputed property or violation of property rights. So if that makes a people, then that's a people. It doesn't require, it may have been brought about by a state, but it doesn't require a state to continue necessarily. So we have people practicing economy. But sadly, in the past, it wasn't just people practicing economy. The monarch would practice household economy on a grand scale. The monarch would want to, have a war chest. So he rather liked the idea that, of course, of taxing, but also of, and the merchants liked it too, those that were favoured by the policy of what has been called mercantilism. In other words, so we export as much as possible and import nothing at all, which is, of course, a silly idea because other people can't export to you unless they earn, and they can only earn by selling to you. So it's a daft idea, but you can see why they wanted it, because they did want a war chest very often. They did go to war, not the sort of wars we have these days, the really expensive ones, but they could strut about a bit and invade a bit of this and invade a bit of that. So the monarch wanted the occasional war, a permanent tax, and assorted grand projects, as they say. Well, that was mercantilism and all that. I'm moving rapidly over the early stuff. Well, that's enough of mercantilism. It was good for the Commonwealth. The king, meanwhile, along with other horrors, was clipping coins, debasing coins of the purity, and what was the worst of all, simply declaring that a much smaller coin was just as good for the payment of debts, especially his debts to other people. You're not going to complain about this, are you? You have no objections to this, do you? Would you like to go to law? I'm sure one of my judges would judge well on this subject. So the money got depreciated, but like nothing like the rate that it happens in the modern world, the last century or so. I mean, to do it properly, you have to have a non-commodity currency. Rothbard was very insistent, I agree with him, that if you're going to have a commodity currency, don't give it a separate name. Or rather, as long as everyone knows that the name isn't the important thing, it's the purity and the weight. And when you set a price, you set it in, even if you just use the name, you're in effect setting it by so much weight of a material of a certain purity. That's what counts. Then you have to pay your debts in that metal of a certain purity, of a certain weight. Not, I've given you the 50 whatevers. Yeah, but the whatever used to be bigger. So whatever? No, that has to be rejected. And that makes it far too easy for government if it's done that way. We now arrive at bourgeois economy. So we're about, 18th, 19th century. Apart from the expensive wars, and there weren't too many of those, the monarch is somewhat constrained in what he can do. You might have Marlborough and the rest, but they're mostly doing it abroad. They're not messing up us too much, and we try to get other armies to fight if at all possible. We'll provide the money because we have a rather a flourishing economy because we don't tax too much and we don't interfere too much, and so that was the bourgeois economy. The king was, of course, top man, but he might live in a rather large house. Kensington Palace is no palace. And they weren't given much to live on, the poor souls. They did well enough, and they had people bowing and scraping, but they weren't very rich. I mean, Blenheim Palace was enormous, though most of that came via Parliament. It wasn't honestly earned, I suppose. So the kings were constrained in reduced circumstances. The government was doing very little at all. But what it did do was the army and the navy. The army wasn't much, and the navy was considerable, but as a percentage of GDP, as they might have said or didn't say at the time, it was not much. There was the empire, and despite the Marxists, the empire didn't enrich the people of England. Trade did, And the empire was unfortunate. It was mostly, well, we don't want to have to look after the bloody place, but the French will be in next if we don't do it, so we better do it, make sure we can keep them out. But the East India Company was self-financing. Admittedly, it was a monopoly, but it had its own navy. Didn't ask the taxpayer to fund that. And the advantage of I don't want to say the empire, but foreign trade, was that all sorts of things, tea, silks, sugar, and spices, made it far more worth making steel and iron, which we were starting to do rather well in this country. There is an argument that people were prepared to work for longer and harder if they could buy something worth having, something decent at the end of the week. Otherwise, well, just take, we'll work, unless it's harvest, we won't work too much. What can you buy? More vegetables. But if it's sugar, if it's alcohol, if it's spices to make the food more interesting, if it's silks, then we'll work a bit harder. So I think there's something to that argument. But I think people like just more of everything anyway, like a better class of vegetable or better cooked. But that was something to it. So apart from the fact that these people were doing things we couldn't do at all, or doing them better or doing them cheaper, that was the gain from trade. It wasn't occupying the territory, it was the exchange of goods. So the empire, in a sense, was unnecessary, but perhaps inevitable, given what people thought, that you ought to have an empire, perhaps, or at least you ought to have trading posts, or if we let the French or the Spanish get it, they'll keep our trade out. And I think the British pretty much, certainly in the 19th century, and it used to astonish German students who couldn't believe it because they wouldn't do it. Well, actually they might, for a period in the 19th century have done it. They couldn't believe that anyone in India could order from anywhere in the world. If they want other people's stuff, they can order it. But surely you restrict sales in India to British. This was not quite believed. Managing the economy. So the monarch has been managing in his own way. He's been trying to make, to put the best face on it, he's been trying to make the country strong and defendable and look good in the world, and have a palace or two and a few ships and sort of portrait opportunities, you would have called them in those days, standing in front of them. Marx and Lenin, however, supposed that the empire was a sort of way of managing to keep the bourgeois economy going. It was a way of paying the workers and keeping them sweet in Britain by living off the sweated labour of the foreign coolie. Of course, it's not true. The foreign coolie did okay out of it, and the British worker was not prepared to revolt anyway. He was doing okay. He'd imbibed the free trade theory and pretty much approved of it. Although within the country, perhaps there should be trade unions. So that's another idea, that the bourgeois state managed the economy in a sense by stopping it collapsing, as it of necessity must collapse because of falling rate of profit, and the need to pacify the proles. But that they could do with their empire. Other precursors of Keynes, which of course is where the modern idea of managing the economy wholesale comes in. He had his precursors, Sismondi, a name I've read about him. They're usually underconsumptionists or oversavers, or rather they think the answer to the business cycle or sluggish growth is underconsumption or oversaving. J.A. Hobson, another one, not to be confused with L.T. Hobhouse, also wrote about liberalism in the period 1900, around then. So by now we're reaching the idea. Malthus was. I better mention Malthus. Malthus, during the dark days around the Napoleonic Wars, and they were for all kinds of reasons, not so good as you would expect, because the government was spending so much and gone for gold standard and was inflating. He was rather worried that there was going to be too much saving and not enough consumption. But after things perked up, he stopped writing about that and wrote about jolly subjects like too many people. I claim to be a better economics graduate from Jesus College. I never even took economics. So, is the market automatically stable? This we've arrived at last. There were those who were questioning whether it was. People might do exactly the right thing. There might be a gold standard, or even just standard gold, as I like to call it. I don't like the gold standard. I like to say standard gold. What's the difference? Well, standard gold means it's not the government's responsibility or the central bank's responsibility to do anything. You just choose standard gold, and standard gold is of a certain purity. You might vary weight for weight from one country to another, and it might be called by a different name. But they didn't have a conversion rate, as Rothbard, amongst others, pointed out. They simply were, if it was twice the weight for the same purity, it was twice the value. But, it's not an exchange rate. It's not going to change unless you keep the name and change the contents. So is the market automatically stable? We now leave the history sketch. Well, in a sense, it's not automatic because it's not an automaton. A market is not something put together. It's not something mechanical. But that's a cheap answer, I know. It'll do for now. So, is it self-stabilising? Well, another Weasley answer would be, well, it's not a self, is it? So it can't be self-stabilising. Well, what we mean is, are there business cycles? And are there business cycles because people are going about business in a normal way, that somehow things tip, and then there's a self-reinforcing, or rather a positive feedback set up such that it goes moving up or coming down. In other words, bad business for one means worse business for more, which means a terrible business for a great many, which so you can see how it might be thought to work. After all, business cycles seem to be there, even in the 19th century on the gold standard. There were, nothing like modern ones, of course, but they were there. But then there was the note issue. There was the use of fiat credit, as I like to call it. So it wasn't just gold. Some call it fractional reserve. My objection is not so much that they don't keep 100% of what was given to them back, because if they did, they couldn't do much with it apart from look at it and dust it. So if you're going to get an interest rate from your money in the bank, it's got to be put to work. Now, it may be that banks are not entirely honest. They have these big safes and there's not much in it, but they don't tell you that. But your money is out there being put to work, and it's mostly in sensible schemes from sensible borrowers, and that's how you get your interest rate. Now, of course, if you all rush back, there won't be enough in there. But they have, if you give them time, and a lot of their assets, as they call them, are fairly liquid, so they can be turned to money if you're fussed about money. In fact, Scottish banks used to have a policy of saying, you might have to wait 30 days. That's how it works. But people agreed to that. So in itself, I have no great objection to what is the horrors of fractional reserve, and many libertarians go, my objection is not that you haven't got all of it still in the cellar, but you lend out some of that. It sounds paradoxical. Not all the depositors' money is lent, but far more is lent than is deposited. And that sounds weird. How does that work? Because they tap, out of cyberspace these days, they tap the loan into existence. Someone looks to be a good bet. He may have a house. Business is doing okay. So you say, right, your account has now got this much in it. Where'd that come from? Well, it's balanced against an asset. It's balanced against an asset. It's as real as paper money. Well, it is as real as paper money. It's slightly less valuable than paper money, which can at least be burnt. But so my objection is not to fractional reserve. My objection is to fiat credit. That's part of the part of the deal. Now, I don't deny that business cycles are manifest. They are. Given modern banking practices, central banks and national monies. So, as Benjamin Britten said, or entitled one of his little things, let's make an opera. And you could say, let's make a recession. Now, how do you make a recession? Well, you have a central bank, you have a policy of credit expansion, of business-friendly interest rates. It also helps state debt be serviced, of course, because the interest rate is lower. Things look rather good. And in the days when there was a gold standard, or after that there were pegged exchange rates, that it was a matter of national honour to keep pegged as they were until they weren't. When there was more credit expansion in one country compared to another, that will of course put pressure on the exchange rate. It simply cannot hold. It mustn't hold, shouldn't hold. And so they had to revalue, and national shame all round, and we aren't paying our way as a nation. I remember the 1960s when there used to be drawings of a pound note sat up in bed, looking a bit unwell with a thermometer sticking out of his mouth, and it would say on the thermometer trade deficit or balance of payments or something. And that go to show that the British people just couldn't hack it anymore. They just weren't. No, it was a stupid policy. That's what it was. The people were not to blame, except for allowing the clowns to get away with a stupid policy. So you make a recession with a national bank, with state money. You do it with regulation, making it difficult to hire people, and welfare, making it tolerable to be unemployed for long periods of time. So that's how you make a recession. You have a credit boom, and then a bust, and then a very slow way back. In fact, if you have a little deflation, which might even now be going on in some senses in America and here, and you have a minimum wage, and you're loading the wage costs ever higher for the businessman by bringing in all sorts of medical, Obamacare and the rest of it, then many people simply aren't, sadly, worth hiring at that rate with those conditions, because it doesn't sound very much, that much per hour, but that's not what they cost to hire them per hour. That's what they get per hour. The non-wage employment costs, the non-wage wage costs, are getting ever higher. So it's tragic. I sometimes jokingly say that everyone is, of course, they're working. They're just working for very little and not doing anything, but they're all employed. I do it partly to make the point. But there's nothing wonderful about several years on the dole. Some people can put up with it. They have a strong view of themselves. They like doing other things. They think it's not great, but some people enjoy it. But for most people, it's dreadful. They can't afford much. They can't go on holiday. They can't give the children what they deserve. It's no good thing. So we mustn't. Libertarians shouldn't look flinty-hearted and say, there's jobs for everyone if you really try. It's very difficult to bid yourself into a job given minimum wage law, given union wage rates, given national wage rates, all the rest of it. It's not easy to do. However, you wouldn't have to do it if there wasn't the business cycle, and the business cycle depends upon national money and national banks. I have to touch upon the macro view of the Keynesians and others. They do talk as if there was this great wad of something, demand, and there's the supply. And the important thing is that they balance. And they balance in nominal monetary terms. And providing the costs are balanced by the money flowing, everyone will be employed. We all work, we all do the same job. Very often we all make one identical product. In those circumstances, you can see how it makes a kind of sense. But if, as the Austrians insist, you look at the pattern of expenditure and the pattern of unemployment, then what the state, for example, or the local government is spending its money on is not going to put those people into work anyhow. Even if the workers who are put into work or paid more are spending most of their money and saving nothing. There's no reason to suppose it's going to fit the pattern that was previously there, the pattern that shouldn't have been there because of the previous boom. So the economy gets bent out of shape, a sustainable long-term shape, by the creative expansion, and things have to go back. And mere spending is not enough. Indeed, there's something of a mystique, a magic of money, especially in the macroeconomic picture. You know, the income streams from factories to families to business. The money goes round, it pushes, it hoses. It's the hydraulic Keynesianism picture. It pushes. The idea that money gets things going. Spending gets things going. If you only spend, everything else will start to go. And I try and be very simple-minded. I have a natural advantage. I work at it, an intelligent simple-mindedness. And I insist that, no. It's producing stuff. I include human services as a product, so it's having a product to exchange makes the money move. The money moves at the end of the process. It's not the cause, it's the ending point. You've got something that you have a warehouse full of, thank you, and they have something which you'd rather like to have, and you use the money as an intermediary. Money, funnily enough, is not used, I don't want to sound Aristotelian here, but money is barren in one sense. Not that it doesn't obtain an interest and should obtain an interest. I see nothing wrong with interest obtained, because people who earn interest are, in a sense, exchanging different goods. One's getting the money now, and one's getting more money later. And the one who handed the money over as a loan prefers the more money later, and the one who's receiving the loan prefers the less money now. So that we can see how that is working in that case. But in every other case, quite literally, money does nothing. Because you part with money. A producer, they talk of working capital, but the point is, in order to make anything of value worth exchanging later for money, you have to have non-money. Human capital, land, physical capital, know-how, good plans, all the rest of it. And at any point that you want to add to this mix, you use the money you have and get shot of the money. The money is not used in the making of things of value. Now, this may seem a bit obvious, and yet, as far as I can see, it is simply taken for granted that the money is the vital spark. No. It's true that to any one producer, he wants people to turn up and buy his wretched stuff. Well, of course he does. But more money for everyone, from the famous monetarist helicopter, what would that do? Simply put the prices up. And those who were making a loss before would make a larger nominal loss than they were before, until they found other things to make, of course. So there's almost a kind of magic spell that has to be broken regarding along with not being able to watch much of the news, I can't, although I do watch the business news, it does annoy me. It's non-stop stimulus speak. Where's the plan for growth? Where's the plan for growth? What a plan for growth? Why should there be a plan for growth? Growth is what you get by invention and saving. Unless you stymie it or stop it in some way from above. There's no need for a plan for growth. Just get out of the effing way. To use technical language. I sit. I do sit like that. The screen saying, what are they talking about? We have to have a plan. We had austerity. Don't like austerity. Let's have a plan for growth. Why do you think we aren't growing as we used to grow? Why do you think there's a need to, in some way, pay heed to the enormous national debt? Because you ran it up. Because you were being Keynesian all the way through. Very convenient Keynes was to such people. Before now, you've merely taxed and spent, but I want you to spend and tax. And borrow. And borrow. And borrow more and more. Which, of course, ends up as a tax anyway. But in the short run, you can actually spend more than is being paid in tax. So, production is all. Consumption is not a source of demand. It is no good thing that capital wears out and has to be replaced. It would be a much better world if it didn't, because then we could make something else that we haven't got. We could have a much shorter working week if we wished, or retire earlier, or things of that kind. So the idea that consumption drives everything. It was like this idea years back in the 70s. Look at the Chinese, all those consumers, but they're not making anything to swap for what we have. No. You should have just said, look at all those potential producers out there, which are now, thank goodness, actually are producing. Good for them. I hope they enjoy their increasing wealth. So production is all, consumption is not a source of demand. And now managing the economy the modern way. By an accommodating monetary policy, which is very accommodating for some bankers, for example. Government debt, which has been run up for, because you can, although why governments should borrow, they alone can tax. Goodness, they can tax, can't they? No one else can tax. They can thieve, but they're in danger from the courts. But the governments are not. So why, except possibly in war, should they wish to borrow? Well, because it doesn't upset present voters so much as taxing would. Taxing and borrowing, it may upset future voters, but hey, I'll be retired, or I've earned my place in the House of Lords by then. So governments shouldn't need to borrow at all. However, when they do borrow, this allows them to have a monetary policy. Spending is the fiscal policy, but the monetary policy is good. They can instruct the central bank, although it's independent, to buy up government debt. So they pay. So banks always like to have something in government debt because it's very liquid and it earns a bit, and the government then buys it back from them. With what money, you may say? From that big box they put it in, as Keynes instructed them to. For in the good times you put money aside, and in the bad times no. It's hyperspaced into existence. It's there. Look, we paid you. It's in your reserve. It's in reserve account at the Bank of England or whatever. Yeah. So governments like that. They may call it demand management. They may call it maintaining nominal demand. They may call it stimulus. They may call it anything. But it's just more funny money. To conclude, economic management, I'm again it, except in the sense that in a purely free market system, everybody is a manager, an economic manager, and they have to fit in with other economic managers. Of course, they don't fit in entirely. I mean, they don't rob other economic managers. They don't tax them. But they may not buy their stuff. So although there can be integration, there can be cohesion in a market order, there aren't guaranteed equal profits for all. That's the fantasy land of general equilibrium, which is neither attainable nor desirable. Because jerking about, as it were, with improvements can mean a higher average income than having a steady or even a slowly growing, if that were possible, general equilibrium. So I don't care tuppence for general equilibrium. Even in theory, I think it's done a great deal of harm. The important thing is that plans should cohere within an economy, that things should be made, better made, and that through a process of competition, superior methods are discovered and adopted by other producers and improved upon. And therefore productivity per head would increase. But this requires neither extra money nor state money of any kind. So that's my idea of managing. We managed to have a money, though no one decided it should come into existence particularly. I mean, miners mine, and those who mint coins. And the coins are stored, and you're given a little note to say you're the owner of so much of this coin, and you can then swap the little notes. No more notes are issued than there is coin, of course. But that's quite enough. You don't boost growth by having fake notes, because, except in the sense that there could be the immorality known as forced saving, whereby those on fixed incomes find their incomes buying less and less, and they have to eat the occasional tin of dog food, as some have put it. Not even pale, not even the good stuff. So that's where money creation can, while people aren't noticing it's going on, lead to an increase in the natural rate of saving, perhaps. But it's no good thing. It's nothing to boast about, and it ends in tears, sadly not for all, not those that deserve it. However, so the money will come about without state aid. The money will be dependable. The money will be, I imagine, uniform throughout the world. It may have different names, different weights, perhaps. But in the modern world, it might not. It might go for a price that will be set in milligrams of gold. And that was that. You wouldn't have to carry little purses around. It would be done. The ownership could be transferred electronically. That's the way it would do. It would be a wonderful thing to have a world money, not with a world government, not with a world state. No. It doesn't require negotiation. It doesn't just require. It requires getting out of the way, please. We'll do it. We would have done it long since. It's been appalling for appalling for some, and not good for most. There has been all these national monies zigzagging about, zooming around, depreciating slower or faster than other ones. It's not been good. It has not helped growth. It has not helped to maintain a low level of people between jobs, not long-term unemployed. In a free market, purely free market, there will be redundancy. There will be periods between jobs. There will not be year after year unemployment, because partly people wouldn't volunteer to pay to keep people in. 3-year unemployment, well, they wouldn't need to, because there will be sufficient flexibility for everyone to get employed. And in a modern advancing economy, even those without, which is insulting, but without skills, I mean, they can walk on 2 legs, speak, pay attention, take instruction. I mean, that's quite useful. There aren't many animals who can do that. And very few machines can do it as well, or as cheaply. So I don't like people being described as unskilled. National fiat monies can go to hell. Sadly, I've not done so. I have become, like not being able to watch the news, I've become a kind of Tom Bombadil, for those who have read Lord of the Rings, not seen the film, in which he doesn't appear. He's a weird character, a bit of a hippie. Certainly got a hippie wife. He wears a silly hat and he stomps about, but he's the one on which the ring of power has no effect. You can put it on. He doesn't disappear. He feels no urges. He feels no compulsion. He's under the will of nobody. And so I, and I think many a libertarian, has come to the same position. We are unimpressed. Furthermore, although we aren't many of us, I like to say to myself, I'm not wrong, and I'm not alone. So, myself personally, I shan't be swooping to power. I won't be a great voice in the world. You have to be taller and younger, an academic, televisual, unbearded, not stout. PhDs are useful. Professorships is even more impressive on people. They'll give in to a professor who tells them that this is the way to do it, not some old fellow in the pub. However, it's encouraging to think that if I don't do it, directly or indirectly, it's going to come about. Or at least jolly well deserves to. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Delightful. Somewhat familiar, but as good as ever. Any question?
I'm not even certain they're questions, so sorry, this might end up a bit rambling. Just to pick up on 2 points that you made me think of on the way through that. One was, and they both come from the same author, and if I mention him, I'm probably going to get booed. Milton Friedman.
Boo!
That's a great socialist. One was on the way through, you talked about national minimum wage, and I'm quite interested in this sort of area. One of the things he obviously proposed was a negative income tax, which obviously Gordon Brown picked up on big time and created tax credits, which obviously is seen as a way of taxing employers and getting them to fund employment in some roundabout way. So I don't know your view on that. But the other point that I picked up from Free to Choose when I read it was, and you did pick up on this, and it is to do with currencies and money per se, is the balance of payments, which is of course the classic one, which I remember reading Free to Choose, and I'm not an economist, so I'd always had it impressed on me about, balance of payments deficit, isn't this a bad thing? And I read Free to Choose, and he said, well, hang on, think about what you're doing. You're buying products from somewhere like Japan. He was writing from an American perspective. You're buying cars from Japan, and all we're doing is shipping them pieces of paper, but we're printing. That's all we're doing, is actually printing pieces of paper and shipping them to them, and they're shipping us goods. So how's that a bad thing?
It's like asking, how is fraud a bad thing?
But it is, we know that, but
certainly, well, as you know, I don't believe in the national economy. I don't so that us people in various places. What is called a national economy is a subject populace who are subjected to a certain set of regulations, a certain tax body, and have to use a certain currency in the payment of debt. That exists. Yes, that all too truly exists. But whether that is an economy, well, if by definition that's an economy, that's an economy. But an economy is an interchange of producers, and since there's trade from all around the world, as soon as that occurs, you are part of, I've tried not to use a term now, I speak of market process, or a greater order or an extended order, to say that you are in it too. That's because you affect the prices, you affect the plans, that you can learn from people in another country to adjust your methods of production. So, yes, I don't like to speak of this economy and that economy, and to have, each has a finance minister, or a Fin Min, as they're now known. They used to be known as Chancellors of the Exchequer in this country, but still. They're all Fin Mins, and they turn up in motorcades, they get on and off of planes, and they shake hands, and they have a press call, and they're saving us from the effect of former Fin Mins and motorcades. So you see the point. It's annoying, it's ugly, it's impertinent, and it doesn't even work. So, another reason not to watch the financial news, but I have to, because some of the facts are interesting, and some of the guests verge on the Austrian and the libertarian.
I think what they mean by managing the economy, they mean managing the tax farm. It is a certain amount of work to manage a farm, and it is real work.
True. They do think, some of them must think, that this stuff works. You really do need boost the economy, to goose the economy, to get it going. Let's get some credit out there. Let's get some spending out there. It's anyone can believe that. Yeah, anyone at the golf club, any petty shopkeeper. But science takes a little more care, and I thought we'd got past that idea. It's a kind of fallacy of composition, which famously Keynes was said to have shown that the classical economists were prone to, but he himself is prone to it. Because someone buying your product is good for you, a lot more money about is good for everybody. Because we'll all sell more than we did before. No. We'll all sell the same, possibly at higher prices.
Isn't the issue with the cars, especially though, that the money that's being printed, its value comes from the money that's already in existence? By creating the person that's printing it and buying the cars from Japan, they are obviously benefiting, but the value of that money is from basically watering down.
Yes. So the exchange rate might
exactly exchange rate.
So the exchange rate might fall, and then
shipping pieces of paper.
and then people who rely on imported food, for example, then find their food prices going up. So it's not a gain.
But America was in a situation when he wrote that in the 80s, where they were in food surplus. They were growing corn and all the
Well, it's been said the Chinese are doing a similar thing, or rather, the Americans are doing a similar thing. But instead of dollars printing the dollars, they're doing that too. The Chinese are buying up all the national debt.
But you see, that was the accusation of Japan in the 80s as well, 80s and 90s, before the crash in Japan. And if you read Michael Crichton's disclosure, it plays on the whole fear of Japan, who was selling all these goods to America, and they were getting all these pieces of paper, but they weren't just sticking them in a bank. They were going and buying vast tracts of America. And so, real estate in LA, which is what the disclosure is about, and this is one of the things that, a lot of the protectionists were making a big deal about nasty foreigners coming and buying up our lands. Well, stop buying their cars then.
Yeah.
Good point.
The title is planning the economy, but I think a more correct title would be who plan who, because we are not against planning and we are not against economy. Economy is people, the people, as you said, and planning is just to decide objective and to act with means in order to achieve that. So if we more we follow Hayek thought, is the question is who plans? Is government planning for us by force against our will, or do we plan for ourselves? So it's more plan for who.
Oh, quite right. Also, at the individual level, at the firm level or the company level, you can, because of as Hayek has pointed out, we have monetary calculation. Amis has pointed it out too. We have monetary calculation, so you can know rather like with picking different rugby teams. You have the possibles and the probables and the. So in other words, you can have various production schemes depending on anticipated selling prices and anticipated input prices, and you go, well, that's a non-starter. So we're only making a loss. If we sell all of it, we're making a loss. So that's how. That one's possible, but can we be sure of the input prices on that one? Is that more? So that may earn less, but it might be more certain. So you can make a rational choice. I dispute the idea that the prices provide information or knowledge, which Hayek at times seems to be saying, perhaps certainly says. And other times he almost is saying that the ignorance doesn't do any harm because you're behaving as if you knew something worth knowing. The mere fact that the price has gone up and you've adjusted your behaviour means you don't need to know why the price has gone up. Is there less lead? Is there greater demand for lead? Is it whatever it might be?
Relative rather than absolute.
Yeah. So I would take the line that what really provides the knowledge is the economic calculation given actual and expected prices. But prices in themselves tell you nothing. This does not mean to a prepared mind who knows something about the business, who knows about the raw materials, who knows about the mines or whatever it might be. He may hear that the price has suddenly shot up and he go, that strike has started, or I heard there'd been an earthquake. So it doesn't mean you can't tell anything, but it's a conjecture. You may make a conjecture that ends up being true, but it's not like decoding a message. It's a message from someone using the code you have. You use the code you have, you get the answer. Prices are not like that. Different people can interpret the price move in different ways. But the important thing is that you use prices to make a monetary calculation of potential profit or certain loss, and then decide your plans accordingly.
Yeah, and therein lies this information.
Yeah.
If you don't, I don't mind. I've no objection to the term information, signal, knowledge. Are fine.
It guides you to do A rather than B.
Yeah, but not
A has a greater return than B.
Yeah, I'm fine. I've no objection. But the price doesn't contain it.
The price is a proxy for people's wants and needs and preferences.
Yeah. I mean, a gun shop might tell you something. Or rather...
After all, the value of anything is merely what someone else is willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
So the price tells you people's propensity to want that other thing.
Yes, but you don't know whether the demand's gone up, the supply's gone down.
That's the point. You can't.
Whether it's
not
fashion,
necessarily an absolute measure. It's
under the prevailing conditions, what's the propensity of people to want that thing versus other things?
and will it last?
Oh.
Is it due to something else being in short supply?
And that's absolutely what's wrong with
So
acting on it.
you have to interpret the whole thing. So
Bitcoin's a classic example. You've got to it's a classic example.
But Bitcoin is.
I went to look at this today.
I'm sure Bitcoin will get stamped on by the state eventually.
If it gets somewhere.
Oh yeah, if it looks like it might be a bolt hole to get out of, and also just not to be visible when you're exchanging, when you're paying each other's stuff. So sales taxes and things. So they will stomp upon it. But in its way, I mean, even Rothbard and others of that sort seem to say that you couldn't possibly use fiat money, and of course that we do. It has to start as genuine money, but eventually the real money is prescribed and pushed off, and here we are all using bits of paper, which plainly are worth more than paper and ink. They just are. As you know, you wouldn't object to a suitcase full of genuine, £20 notes. So in the same way, Bitcoin, especially as it's trying to, as I understand it, ape gold, it would not increase rapidly. They add a bit more to it, but as with gold, you can't add much more to the amount. But I fear it will get done.
I think one of the points about printing bits of paper and sending them to the Chinese to get goods from them is that the inflation that results doesn't affect all people equally, through society. That wouldn't be good, but it wouldn't be so bad as the case now, where people who aren't earning and are just savers are the ones that are hit, and often they're the most vulnerable. But anyway, the point was, of course, Bob, if we've got fractional reserve banking, we're going to get credit expansion and credit contraction, and we shouldn't be afraid of recessions if they are just short, sharp recessions, cleaning the system out. But what we've got now is not a recession at all, We're really in the second Great Depression. I mean, that's fairly clear now, and it's going to continue with present policies of money printing and state involvement. Sorry?
Quantitative.
Yeah, well, they'll come up with another euphemism for that shortly. But I think we should be clear about this, that this isn't just a recession. This is a government-induced Great Depression.
Rothbard wrote about that, didn't he? About the...
Oh, yes. I think the Austrians... It's not the only way of having a business cycle, the credit expansion and contraction, but it's the usual one. And it's the one we've had. Undeniable. I didn't lay into the bank, so I could have done. Oh, I should say, I'm sure you've heard of it by now. It's been you've heard about David Stockman's book.
Yeah.
Yep.
I heard about it.
Ex-budget wonk under Reagan. He resigned eventually, not in disgust. Well, he says he got run out of town on a rail. That's because he said that you're not proper Republicans yet. Spend, and so you spend more on the military, but you won't put the taxes up. So he got out. But he's now written a 700-page book entitled "The Great Deformation" or Deformation: The Corruption of Capitalism in America. It's probably worth, once enough people have read it. It's about £10 Kindle. I'm on the way through it, and it's magnificent stuff because he knows all the facts and he knows enough of it. He's sort of an Austrian, and he's a bit of a libertarian, so. Not wholesale, minicus, I suppose, but it's great fun. But he really knows how the banks work. And he poo-poos the whole idea that there was going to be a global meltdown and the cash machines would go dark and businesses couldn't borrow and food wouldn't be purchased to transport because you couldn't. He said, no. The AIG could go down. That was no problem. Most of them could go down. If we want to borrow money, the rest of the world's there ready to come in. Just let the interest rate go up a bit. That'll get the money flooding in. There was no need for. So you either have an organised, as under J.P. Morgan, he got his boys in, and they went to the banks around when it was turn of the last century before last. So they came and said, right, you're insolvent. Goodbye. You've done some stupid things, but we can put you into shape. However, top management, take a hike. These men are coming in. Now you get the money. Now that was the way it was done then. You don't need no state required. Of course, the problem was caused by the state, but still, at least it didn't require a state solution. Or you do the Icelandic thing, or I believe the Swedes did it. the Swedes, where they simply nationalised the whole lot. Took into public ownership. The depositors are all safe. Now, of course, that led to the problem in the first place, because they could private profits and socialise losses, and that's not an incentive you want to give to the bankers, because they'll take advantage of that, and they did. But the Icelandic and the Swedish method was okay. Management go, shareholders get zip. Not all depositors, up to a certain amount, you get your. We can print that because they're not in the euro.
That's just the Cyprus solution, which
Yeah.
won't be moaning about.
Yeah, well, that's what they wanted. They would like to do that. Yeah, so that's another way of doing it. We didn't have to do this ridiculous bailout. I mean, it's funny, rather like quantitative easing. Let's say we're printing hey, we're not even printing it, we're typing it into existence.
I don't know, Bob, if they hadn't done that in the current paradigm, and I'm not standing up for that, but if they hadn't done that, every bank, in my opinion, every bank on this planet is practically insolvent.
No. Oh, well.
So,
yeah, but there's insolvent and insolvent.
But they have assets.
yeah, but the assets aren't worth what they have.
If you must have a central bank, it should do what it was supposed to do, which is to lend at a penal rate, but freely, as much as necessary, to look after solvent banks who had done some silly things. Right? And the other ones could go hang. And there'll be enough of the ones that were but didn't need any help or just needed this help. And that's what the American Central Bank was set up to do. Mr. Stockman has it in one of his chapters, which I can recommend. The idea was that the market would decide what the interest rates were, what growth was. What was the central bank to do? It was simply to lend, at times, to those who were solvent, but there have been reasons why they've gone short, which were understandable, and they were basically solvent. They had all sorts of assets, but they couldn't get them in quickly enough. Okay, but that's not what we had. That's not what we had in 2008. However, I should say, this silly talk. This is where I come back to my. It's almost, funnily enough, it's almost old-fashioned communists, old-fashioned socialists rather. The socialists would say, look, we have all these men unemployed. Let's say we have things that they need. We have capital to use. Let's just use it and get on. Why can't we just do that? And of course, for reasons of the economic calculation argument and the tyranny and all the rest of it, it doesn't work. However, it does pay to sometimes just think, as I did in this briefly, what's going on to get a valuable product into existence. So it's handed that way. Are we happy?
Yeah, you said that you follow financial news. There's so much of it. Which ones are worth listening to and which ones are best?
Oh, I go for the CNBC. I think that one. Yeah. They occasionally have a couple of decent Austrians on. Sean, what's his face? Yeah, there are two decent ones. They sometimes appear on the other channels too. But it is galling to see the idea that yet again another announcement. Yet again, of course, sadly, in the end, you have to pay attention to what these chumps are doing because it has an effect. So you have to, instead of just having no one to listen to, the government turns up once every 7 years, so you don't talk to that. There's nothing we got from government. There's no central bank, so there's nothing to know before the others or respond to rapidly. There's just the market. There's just other people and their money, and what they do with it. Oh, I didn't stress enough that, or at all possibly, that banks strut around saying, we finance this, we fund that, we fund. They do nothing of the kind. They are, at best, mere conduits for real savings. That's all they are. They may use their expertise to decide, take your money and divide it up so it's not just plunged on one thing. And they're quite good at looking for, safe-ish bets and things worth putting into, and those with collateral. very importantly. So they sort of invest it for you. It's not called that. That's in effect what they're doing. You aren't given a share. But there is the reason you get your interest, and it's spread out. Now that's something they can do, but they aren't they aren't doing the saving, they aren't doing the funding. The savers are doing it. They're simply using their expertise.
They might be expanding their credit though.
Well, that's what they do, of course. Yes, they are part of the system. Though it requires a central bank to do it.
And borrowing on the wholesale markets.
Yeah. But again, there will be wholesale markets with gold currency, but there wouldn't be the credit expansion. There might be money rushing in. You could have bubbles, smallish bubbles, I would think, and not as devastating in their consequences, with even just a gold currency, because there might be an invention or a fashion, like the tulip bulbs, and you get the escalator system whereby because the price is going up, people are piling in because they're piling in, the price is going up, therefore more people pile in, therefore it's worth selling something else just to get the cash, or getting your cash out from under the mattress and piling in as well. Because you can get out in time. Well, you can't all get out in time. But that's far less damaging, because that's simply, it's a zero sum. Some have lost, some have gained. But there was all this talk about, along with the financial meltdown, that the economy was going to collapse. There would be no production because, actually I never said why there would be no production. But the idea was people would stop growing food and making stuff, and because the banks, because you have to borrow to pay the payroll. No, you don't. What kind of company is that has to borrow to meet the payroll? They might borrow a bit to be part of the payroll at times, but no, you can't all borrow to meet the payroll. Who the hell's saving in those circumstances? No, so there's silly talk about banks. They strut around, they earn a lot, and there are far too many are employed than much imagine. This seems to be entirely unnatural. And a natural bloatedness. So I don't know how small it would be otherwise. Any more with it?
Thanks very much.
Oh, well,